Next, we'll move on to Daniel Baker from Business Administration and Management at UW-Superior, presenting on income inequality and the effects on pursuit of education. You may begin.
Imagine you make $65,000 a year, US average. You live in Superior, Wisconsin, and have a loving spouse, 2 wonderful children, a dog, and a Hulu subscription. With a livable wage there being $51,000 for a family of 4, you're not rich, but you make ends meet. Now take the same family, but instead put them in Washington, D.C. This family is objectively poor, the livable wage in D.C. being $80,000. For context, a house in D.C. costs 7 times that of Superior. These families' lives, despite earning the same income, are vastly different. One family manages an annual vacation while the other routinely waits in line at the food bank. The only similarity between these families is in how much money their children will get in federal assistance for college. My name is Daniel Baker, and I'm a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Superior. When I graduated high school, I ticked every box of average: middle class, public school, average grades. And despite my parents making close to a 6-figure salary, we lived in a place where that amount was barely livable. So imagine my shock when I filled out the FAFSA and I learned that my parents were expected to contribute 20% of their annual income to pay for my schooling. Across the country, this is not uncommon. And that brings us to the topic of my research: income inequality and the path to education for the middle class. I conducted a survey using current American college students, asking 4 basic questions: age, social class, parents' annual income, and how they primarily paid for college. My hypothesis was a U-curve: poor students and wealthy students receiving the most money, with middle-class students receiving the least. Throughout the results of my research, it became more and more evident that a middle-class student whose family made an average US income got just as much financial aid as a student whose family made 3 times that amount. Meanwhile, identified poor and wealthy students received the most either government or family financial support. Using and expanding this research, it would be possible to construct a more sophisticated financial aid algorithm using geographic and economic data, hedging a family's income against their expected cost of living, debts, and other factors that are currently ignored by the FAFSA that determine fiscal flexibility. Identifying the faults within the system and understanding the unique situation that every family faces is important. And this would help universities and the Department of Education expand the program to make sure that all students have access to a college degree. But ultimately, middle-class students across the country are faced with a choice. Do they sign their life away into debt to justify an education, or do they give up and risk slipping down into the grasp of poverty? Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any questions from the judges?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Tim. No, Daniel, appreciate you talking about it as someone who had $75,000 of student debt at 9% interest for some of my loans. A question is, the FAFSA is what you're saying currently does not collect or calibrate geographical information as it is related to income?
I'm saying it doesn't take into account cost of living because it's dependent fully on AGI tax brackets. So that, a family making $80,000 in Superior, Wisconsin will have a lot more fiscal flexibility than a family making $80,000 living in Los Angeles County, for example.
Yep. Thanks. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
And Daniel, how hard was it for you to collect this information? Were people able and willing to share this information, or was this difficult to have a cross-sectional data collection?
People were pretty willing. I actually made the option of social class self-identified, so what they considered themselves, middle class, upper class, etc. And I found it very interesting because a student who lived in a more rural town, for example, with a much lower cost of living, would consider making a family income of $100,000 as upper class or wealthy, whereas a student who made that much but lived in a more expensive area like DC or Hawaii consider themselves middle class or even sometimes lower middle class, but they were very willing.